Welcome back, Fanfield family! Today, as a bit of a precursor to the upcoming videos on magic and materia in Final Fantasy VII, we're going to discuss what materia actually is, then look at the different elements and status effects in the game. Let's get to it! First though, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. There's a new video every single week, and subscribing means you get to see the videos as soon as they go up, and you get notified about polls, pictures, news, and more before anyone else. Alright, on to the video. Let's start with the simplest question first. What is materia? Materia are crystal orbs that grant the holder the ability to use magic. To that extent, there are 5 major types of materia, and over the next few videos we'll talk about each in turn. Green is magic materia, yellow is command materia, blue is support materia, purple is independent materia, and red is summon materia. There are 2 additional materia that the player never gets access to, as they're both very plot-centric: the white materia, holy, and the black materia, meteor. Materia is the crystallized knowledge of the planet itself, created from the pure spiritual energy of the life stream, a sort of world-spanning energy force that consists of all the souls of the dead. The life stream mixes and pulses and fuses the spirits of the dead into a central consciousness, some of which is siphoned off when a new being is born, be they human, animal, monster, or even plant life. Materia occurs in a few forms. The most common is artificial or manufactured materia. This is materia that has been specifically cultivated for a singular purpose. This is the kind of materia that you find throughout Final Fantasy VII and both Remake and Rebirth, and is found as polished glowing spheres. As the party fights with their materia, it gains ability points, or AP, which effectively levels up the materia. As materia levels up, it unlocks new abilities and spells, and when a materia orb reaches its max level, a new copy with 0 AP is born. Certain weapons and armor have double AP growth, meaning AP earned by materia equipped to them is multiplied by 2, and there are even 2 weapons, one for Cloud, the Apocalypse, and one for Cid, the Scimitar, that have triple AP growth. Next is natural materia, which occurs when the life stream bubbles up and through the earth and creates small Mako fountains, then crystallizes. These are generally more jagged, asymmetrical crystals. Finally, huge materia, which is extremely rare and is a plot element, are oversized crystals of materia that the head of Shinra's weapons development department, Scarlet, claims are roughly 333 times more powerful than normal materia. Sephiroth explains to the player why materia allows its holder to use magic in both the original game and in the recently released Final Fantasy VII Rebirth.
Naturally formed materia. And look at the size of it. Astounding. For the Mako energy to condense into something like this, it must have taken an eternity.
I've always wondered, how does materia let you cast spells exactly?
How did you ever get to be a soldier? To put it simply, the knowledge of the ancients is sealed within each orb. That knowledge not only connects us to the planet, it allows us to tap into her power. That's how we can use magic. Or so they say.
Really?
Okay, before we discuss the different elements, what is an element? In Final Fantasy, different spells and other effects have an element associated with them. There are 9 main elements and 2 additional elements that behave differently. There are also physical elements, which I can get into in another video if there's interest.
Water, earth, fire, air.
Different monsters will resist, negate, or absorb certain elements. Because of this, it's important to know what your enemies are weak against. To that end, the sense materia can be very useful on a first or second playthrough, as it will tell you if a specific target has any elemental weaknesses, or if they'll absorb an element and be healed by it. The 9 main elements are fire, ice, lightning, earth, poison, gravity, water, wind, and holy, and we'll discuss them in detail here. The other two elements are restorative and hidden, and behave a little differently, so I won't go too in-depth on them here. First up,
Fire! 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 Fire!
fire is one of the first elements that the player has access to, and is most notably the center of the fire line, Fire, Fire 2, and Fire 3, but has a number of other spells and abilities associated with it, including two summons, Ifrit and Phoenix, two learnable enemy skills, Flamethrower and Beta, and the powerful spell Flare. There are a few other spells and abilities that utilize it, and fire is most effective against ice-type enemies. Next is Ice is one of the two starting elements equipped to Cloud at the very start of the game. Ice is the element of the basic Ice, Ice 2, Ice 3 line, as well as the powerful Freeze spell, the Shiva summon, and a few other abilities that use several elements at once. It's generally the most effective against fire element enemies. Lightning is the other of the two starting elements equipped to Cloud at the beginning of the game. It governs the spell line Bolt, Bolt 2, and Bolt 3, the summon Rama, the learnable enemy skill Trine, and a few multi-element abilities. Lightning tends to be extremely effective against machines, which makes it very useful in the early game, as many of the enemies and even bosses in the early hours of the game are robotic. It's also frequently especially effective against aquatic enemies. Earth is only accessible after leaving Midgar, and is the element of the Quake, Quake 2, Quake 3 spell line, as well as the powerful Break spell, the Titan summon, and one of Yuffie's limit breaks, Landscaper. Earth outright misses against most flying enemies, something that'll make a lot of sense to any Pokemon fans out there. There are only 5 enemies in the entire game that are explicitly weak to Earth, and many enemies are immune due to flying or floating. But on the other hand, out of the basic elemental spells, Quake does the most base damage. Let's move on to Poison is both an element and a status condition, and the two are very closely linked. Poison is most notably the element of the Bio, Bio 2, Bio 3 line of spells. If a target is immune to poison damage, they're also immune to the poison status, and targets healed by the poison element will receive healing over time from the poison status, much like the healing spell Regen. Regen can be stacked on top of poison for additional healing over time if a party member is given the ability to absorb poison. Gravity is a little different than all the other elements. It inflicts percentage damage based on how much HP a target has left. The main line of spells, Demi, Demi 2, and Demi 3, inflict 25%, 50%, and 75% of the target's current health respectively, which means that a target specifically weak to gravity will take double damage, and Demi 2 will inflict 100% of their current health as damage, instantly killing them.
Please, the Prince of all Science does not collide!
In addition to the Demi line of spells, Barrett's Limit Break Mind Blow and the enemy skill Laser are gravity element. Due to its percentage damage, most bosses are immune to gravity, with the notable exception of the optional super boss Emerald Weapon, and flying or floating enemies tend to be weak to gravity. The water element lacks any magical spells, but there are 2 reliable ways to inflict water damage, the Leviathan summon and the learnable enemy skill Aqua Lung. The wind element also has no direct spell line, but the first obtainable summon, Choco Mog, is wind element, and, much later in the game, the Tornado spell is a single spell that inflicts wind element damage. Wind is typically very effective against flying enemies. Finally, Holy. Due to its importance as a story element, the party only has one way of inflicting holy damage, and that's the Alexander summon. No enemy uses the holy element. Restorative and hidden are the other 2 elements. Restorative is curious as it technically does do damage, but most targets are flagged as absorbing it, so that the damage dealt by restorative magic instead heals the target. The unique exception to this are undead enemies, who will take damage from restorative spells. This makes the few undead enemies in the game very exploitable, as you can simply inflict massive damage by casting a healing spell, or even one-shot an undead enemy by using an elixir, X potion, or Phoenix down on them. One of the bosses in the game is undead, and as such, hitting it with an X potion will instantly win an otherwise difficult fight. Finally, Hidden. No, Hidden, not Hidan. Get out of here, you. Hidden was never officially named, only has one attack used by an optional super boss late in the game, and in modern ports of Final Fantasy VII, there is no way to protect against it. Next, let's talk about status conditions. Status conditions are different effects that alter a character's attributes, actions, or abilities in some way. Some are positive and some are negative. Sleep puts the subject into a state where they cannot take any action, though their ATB gauge continues to fill, and they will not act until they wake up, which will come after a set duration or when struck by a physical attack. Because only physical attacks break the sleep status, sleeping targets are very vulnerable to magic attack. Sleep is indicated by 3 small Z's over the afflicted target. Poison is a status ubiquitous among role-playing games like Final Fantasy. Poisoned targets take poison element damage over time. As mentioned earlier, targets immune to the poison element will be immune to the poison status, and targets that absorb poison element attacks will actually be healed by the poison status. Poison is indicated by the afflicted subject flashing green. Sadness and fury are 2 statuses that are intrinsically linked, and are some of the very few that actually linger after battle. Sadness reduces the damage that a character takes by 30%, but also halves the rate at which the limit gauge fills. Fury reduces the character's chance to hit by 30%, but doubles the rate at which the limit gauge fills. In battle, these statuses are indicated by a change to the limit gauge's color. Normally it's pink, with sadness it's blue, and with fury it's red. You can inflict these statuses yourself by using a tranquilizer to inflict sadness or a hyper to inflict fury, and these can be used outside of battle. The opposite items will cure the conditions. This can be used to great effect. For example, a character that has low HP or defense can benefit from sadness, like Aerith, while fury is great for filling the limit gauge quickly. Confusion takes control of a party member away from the player, and the afflicted character will attack allies instead of enemies, including using their last input command. Confused enemies will continue their usual attack pattern, but will reverse the definition of allies and enemies. They'll use damaging abilities and attacks on their allies or themselves, and healing abilities on the party. A single physical hit will break a character out of confusion. Confusion is indicated by the subject spinning in place. Silence prevents the afflicted target from using magic. Magic and summon commands are grayed out, preventing their use, and enemies afflicted with silence cannot use their magical abilities. Silence is indicated by a small thought bubble with an ellipsis over the afflicted target. Haste is the first truly positive status condition we'll discuss. Haste makes the ATB gauge fill twice as fast, allowing the subject to act twice as often. The only drawback is that time-based effects like the barrier status will run out twice as fast. Haste is indicated by the subject's idle animation playing twice as fast.
Slow is the opposite of haste.
Excuse me. Slow is the opposite of haste, making the ATB gauge fill half as fast, and as a mirror to haste, slow makes any time-based effects last twice as long. It's indicated by the idle animation running at half speed. If a target is immune to slow, they're also immune to haste. Stop completely halts the ATB gauge, preventing any action until the effect ends.
Scared.
This also halts the duration of time-based effects. It's indicated by the idle animation freezing. Frog turns the subject into a toad, blocking out all of their commands except the basic attack, item use, and the spell Toad if the party member has it equipped. Frog cuts the attack power to 1/4 of the normal base damage and does not end when the afflicted party member is KO'd. By casting Toad or any other method of inflicting the Frog status, a target that has Frog status will return to normal. It's indicated by the target turning visually into a frog. Small reduces the afflicted target's attack power to 1, so they never do more than 1 damage with physical attacks, though magic attacks are unaffected. Like Frog, KOing an afflicted party member will not end the small effect. Interestingly, there's an enemy called Hungry that can eat characters that are afflicted by Small, removing them from the battle entirely and marking them as defeated in the game's code. Small is visibly indicated by shrinking the target down. Petrify is one of the most dangerous and terrifying statuses in the game. When a target is petrified, they're flagged as defeated in the game's code, and they cannot be altered in any way. HP and MP will not change, and the only other status that can change them at all is Small. There are only a very few items and effects that can cure Petrify, the soft item and the enemy skill White Wind being 2 notable examples. Petrify is visually indicated by the afflicted target ceasing all movement and their battle model's color getting a bit less saturated. Slow Numb sets a 60-second timer, and when the timer runs out, the afflicted target is petrified. It's visually indicated by the countdown over the afflicted target's head and the target's colors getting brighter, like Petrify. Regen grants the subject constant HP regeneration, restoring health until the effect runs out. Curiously, Regen is not classified as a restoration element effect, so it will heal undead enemies instead of damaging them. Regen is indicated by the subject pulsing a fiery orange red. Barrier status halves incoming physical damage, and its partner is M barrier, which halves magical damage. These two effects are a little different as they have their own special meter on the status bar between the character's name and their HP gauge. Reflect bounces spells off of the subject and back onto the caster. Very few enemies have the ability to establish Reflect, the most notable being Genova Life. It's not visually indicated until it activates, with a simple reflect animation playing before the reflected spell is cast on the original caster. There are a handful of spells that cannot be reflected, as well as all summons and most of the enemy skill abilities. Shield is a powerful status that prevents all incoming physical and elemental damage, though certain damage-dealing items can still get through. Death Sentence sets up a 60-second timer, and when the timer runs out, the target is KO'd. Interestingly, while this sounds bad, it can actually be heavily exploited. The Curse Ring, a late-game accessory item, will inflict Death Sentence on the wearer as soon as the battle starts. If Tifa is under the Death Sentence status with her Power Soul weapon equipped, her attack power quadruples. By giving her the Curse Ring, she'll start with that power boost, making her extremely powerful as long as the status lasts, though if the battle lasts more than 60 seconds, she'll be knocked out. As this is a high-risk, high-reward strategy, the player must be careful. The Manipulate status is one that only the party can inflict. Manipulate grants control over the target while taking away control of the caster, effectively making their turn controlling the enemy. If the player makes a manipulated enemy attack themselves, the effect will end. Otherwise, the effect is indefinite. Manipulate is required to get some of the enemy skill abilities, as enemies will not normally cast beneficial effects on the player's party. It's visually indicated by the target turning around and pulsing cyan. Berserk increases the subject's physical attack damage by 1.5 times, but takes away control, limiting the character to pure physical attacks on random targets. It's visually indicated by the target pulsing a vivid red. Paralyze freezes the subject in place, preventing any action. It lasts for a shorter time than the aforementioned stop status, but it also prevents the target's limit gauge from filling for the duration. Darkness is a status that is used primarily by enemies. The player can only inflict it with the Ink item.
Hey, who turned out the lights?
Darkness halves the accuracy of weapon attacks, but due to a programming oversight, it only affects a handful of commands. Attack, Morph, Deathblow, Mug, Slash All Flash, 2x Cut, and 4x Cut. As enemies don't use these commands, inflicting darkness on an enemy is pointless. It's visually indicated by the target pulsing black. Death Force is a status that can only be cast through an enemy skill and protects against all forms of instant death, though not against Kate Sith's Death Joker. If a character with Death Force receives Death Sentence, the timer will still count down, but when it ends, the character will not be KO'd. Resist locks in status conditions on the target. No new status conditions can be applied, but conversely, all status conditions already on a character cannot be removed. Peerless is a status that makes characters completely immune to physical and magical attacks for the duration and locks in status conditions like Resist, while also preventing enemy MP removal attacks. There are only two ways to bestow Peerless, and both are through Aerith's limit breaks, specifically Planet Protector and Great Gospel. Peerless is visually indicated by the subject pulsing yellow. Finally, All Lucky Sevens is a rather unique effect, though not mechanically a status condition. Still, I felt it worth mentioning. When a character, or enemy, reaches exactly 7,777 HP, the message All Lucky Sevens appears on screen, and until their HP changes, every attack and recovery they perform is for 7777 points. In addition, party members that hit this effect will enter an uncontrollable state where they attack 64 times for 7777 damage per hit, dealing just under 498,000 damage. Enemies will continue their normal attack pattern, but every hit they deal will inflict 7777 damage. When the battle ends, the party member is dropped to 1 HP. There's also a recently discovered glitch where Emerald Weapon can enter Lucky Sevens when not at 7777 HP, due to the way the status is coded. It only looks at the last 2 bytes of data to figure out if the status should be entered. 4-8 Productions has a good video covering it, which I'll link below. And that's all the elements and status conditions. Thanks for watching. Next time we'll be looking at magic materia. If you enjoyed this, please consider liking, commenting, and subscribing. It takes 2 seconds for you and really helps the channel out. There's a ton of content ahead, so I'll see you in the next one.